Good morning and welcome to the Valley Economic Alliance Economic Development Initiative program on navigating tariffs. I'm Sonia Blake, President and CEO of the Valley Economic Alliance, and I'm thrilled that you're here with us today. It's a very important topic, a fast-changing topic, and something that is really impacting our local economy here in the San Fernando Valley and beyond. And we want to make sure that we bring some light to the topic and open up this forum for our community to be able to talk about it, better understand what's happening, and be able to plan for their business and workforce growth moving into the future. The Valley Economic Alliance is a nonprofit organization that has been serving our 5-city region for 30 years. And our partner cities include Burbank, Calabasas, Glendale, San Fernando, and the San Fernando Valley region of the city of Los Angeles, all in North LA County. We work very hard to help strengthen our local economy through a free business assistance program, through workforce development programs that connect people to training to help them upskill and earn higher salaries, help employers find talented staff to help them grow their businesses. We promote tourism of the San Fernando Valley region, and a whole host of other types of topics that improve the quality of life in our area and help our area to thrive. We're super excited about our economic development initiative. So we're here to help grow our economy and help our residents to thrive, help visitors to patronize local businesses. And we welcome you to get involved with us, to partner with us, and get in touch if there are ways that you might be able to get involved in this work that we're doing together. We're very thrilled with our partnership with Bank of America. We've been working with the bank for many, many years to help advance our mission. And we're very thrilled to have two phenomenal speakers with us today from our partner, Bank of America. I want to give a shout out to Valerie Rivas with B of A, who helped us to connect with our two speakers today, whom I'm going to introduce to you right now. First, I want to introduce to you Barbara Bagley. She is Managing Director and Market Investment Executive for Greater Los Angeles at Bank of America Private Bank. And in this role, she's responsible for a team of portfolio managers who oversee the creation and management of personalized investment portfolios, incorporating quite a broad range of advice. To help individuals with to meet market needs, investment-related goals, etc. We also have with us Lauren Sanfilippo. She is Director and Senior Investment Strategy Analyst for the Chief Investment Office within Bank of America Corporation. And in this role, she contributes to the development of the CIO's investment strategy, providing timely analysis of economic and thematic market trends. So we're very excited about having their insights on tariffs, how they impact our local economy, what we might anticipate to come, so that our stakeholders can make wise and sober decisions for how they want to proceed. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Barbara and say thank you so much for being with us. And we're excited about what you and Lauren have to share.
Hey, thank you, Sonia. And thanks everyone for taking time out of your day to join us here. I hope the volume's okay. Please indicate if it's not. Maybe Sonia can do that, but I think you can hear clearly. So yeah, so I'm sitting here in my office in Century City. I grew up in Tarzana, so I'm a Valley girl at heart. And my colleague Lauren Sanfilippo is based in New York. And Lauren and I have worked together for many years now, and we do these updates, client meetings, that sort of thing. So thanks again. We're going to keep this conversational. I'm going to pose a list of questions that have come up in a lot of our client meetings recently. So Lauren will tackle them, and then we'll get into some level of detail. And if we've got time at the end, we'll take some questions from everyone attending. But to kick it off, so Lauren, just before we start our conversation on tariffs, can you set the stage by providing a brief economic outlook? What's our bank's view for 2025? Where are we now? Let's set the stage with an economic outlook.
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Barbara, for having me. And Sonia, great to be with you all. I'd say just at the highest level from the bank, we just think nationally we're basically in a soft patch here, just not a recession. We've been anticipating a slowdown for some time, just by pure moderation in economic growth compared to last year. There were distortions with what we saw in the beginning of the year because of front-loaded demand ahead of the tariffs, and that was true for first quarter growth. Mechanically, that was imports, that piece, that was a drag on GDP. But all along, really, the engine has been, and this is really the predominant theme coming out of COVID, that's consumer resilience. Our Bank of America credit card and debit card data tell us this. The labor market has been the biggest hinge factor, and there's some normal labor market churn that we've definitely seen, but overall an unemployment rate around 4% still supports spending. You've seen some delinquencies, namely for autos and credit cards, they've ticked up. We have more consumer debt in this country than ever before, but our debt service actually looks manageable. So to us, the buffer against the shock is still healthy employment. That's that consumer. Companies, yes, they've been hesitant to hire here, and I hear it all the time, real time from clients. You know, we just don't see any type of apocalyptic large scale layoffs that really would concern us. And central to this talk today, certainly that tariff-related uncertainty has weighed on consumer sentiment. That's been true for a while now. I don't put too much weight on sentiment, really that soft survey data. Instead, we look more closely at the retail sales prints as an example, that wage growth. We consider that to be hard data. But that uncertainty, it's still out there. We've seen a little bit of a rebound here in some of the confidence measures. That's been encouraging, but directionally, I'd say that's on the back of the de-escalation in tariff talks, particularly that pause with China. That's provided some relief to sentiment. But that's basically baked in at this point. I'd say, Barbara, just on the go-forward basis, we're looking for growth to hang in there, running slightly below trend for the rest of the year, and probably same with next year. Inflation could bump up really beginning in the third quarter. And then the unemployment rate maybe peaks out sometime next year. That's sort of what we're penciling in, that a peak in unemployment, mid to high 4%. And then just on the rate front, we don't think the Fed needs to cut anytime soon, right? Just given all the things I just sort of laid out. Inflation bumping up, unemployment where it is, right? Like, why would they need to? Both sides of their dual mandate are suggesting more of like a pause here for the Fed. And that's not to say that next year we couldn't see multiple cuts. And we have some of those cuts penciled in on the back half of the year. That's sort of the shared view among economists. But the rate cut call, it's probably anyone's guess. That is very different from thinking the cost of capital would come down progressively this year. That was sort of the call for outlooks before this sort of tariff talk really started ramping up. But I think a 10-year around 4.5%, in our opinion, that's probably reflective of a normalization in the rates market. So structurally, rates just had to shift higher, Barbara.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So sort of below trend growth, but no recession, and below trend's been around 3. So below trend is sort of anything above 0 or 50 basis points. We'll just see how it goes. So Lauren, getting into tariffs, can you talk a little bit about the history of tariffs, in particular, the impact of the tariffs in 2018? And then from there, we'll get on to what's our base case for tariffs now. So let's go back to 2018 when we first started hearing the word tariff of the first administration, Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of focus on historical comps for tariffs. And I think in theory, the idea that tariffs, it's typically a protectionist measure and policy tool to support domestic industry and to drive revenues, right? That's sort of just baseline, sort of what's out there. A lot of parallels are drawn to the 1930s, but to your point, 2018 makes a lot more sense. You think about Trump and what he sort of laid out in his first term. It's still this deficit issue, which is at the heart of what Trump's really driving at. It's been an issue for 50 years running, and that's 50 straight consecutive years. The last time we ran a merchandise trade surplus was actually in the 70s. And that's because the US consumer has been the global consumer, right? It's really the demand pool. And specific to 2018, Trump, he launched steel and aluminum tariffs. That's not unlike today. Again, directed towards China for the most part. Remember, we saw issues over the soybeans flare up, and then sort of other trading partners sort of got caught in the crosshairs, Canada, Mexico, the EU. And there's just been enough studies done that tell us US consumers and farmers, they really bore the brunt of those tariffs in 2018. And I'll say the estimates are really all over the place in terms of what each household was effectively taxed. There also was a trend in global trade sort of away from China. And that's when we started seeing the shifting in sourcing and investment for US multinationals. So I think those are some of like the best high level sort of takeaways from 2018 to sort of use as the comparative period.
Yeah, we first started hearing terms like reshoring in 2018 and capital coming back to the US. The bank, used the term manufacturing renaissance, which I'm not sure we can say that renaissance is fully evolved yet, but the idea that some of the reshoring would result in additional manufacturing here in the US. And reshoring became a term that's, become more popular, as well as friendshoring, where, we're, still importing, but we're importing from friendly trading partners. And I think, I think 2018, there was a lot of angst in the market about the impact. We did see a lot of volatility. And, we managed through it. I think we give a lot of credit to our clients that are small business owners, just a great number of clients throughout Bank of America and within the private bank are small business owners. And we know these are really challenging times. We've heard from a variety across different industries. So Lauren, one thing that we get a lot of questions from clients on is inflation and how are tariffs related to inflation? How do they impact inflation? Lately, inflation's been coming down. So we actually had a very good print last week. The PCE, which is a measure the Fed likes to watch, is hovering right above 2%, very close to their target. We've got CPI tomorrow, PPI on Thursday. Talk about tariffs and inflation, and are they related? How does that work?
Yeah, I think it'll take time for inflation to sort of bump up here on behalf of or caused by the tariffs, right? We're not there yet, but it all depends, right? Is this like a one-time price increase? Is this, could we maybe see inflation bump up just like maybe more in like the 3 to 4% range, right? Those are all things that we're sort of stress testing now. But a lot just still depends on how these talks evolve, right? So the price increases, yes, we think they could be more persistent on the back of maybe tariffs, duration matters here, and degree matters, right? If we're talking like a 10% baseline tariff rate, that's much different, depending, or compared to what we heard at the beginning of April. So I do think it depends how companies, to your point, can adjust the supply chain, right? Just how nimble can companies be around these cost pressures? Are they able to mitigate tariffs just based on maybe inventories and things that they did with their inventories over Q1 and Q2? So I think it all depends. I don't mean to sort of like punt on the question, but I really do think it depends. I think there could be a series of price hikes that some consumers may face. It all depends on if this is like a sector specific thing for certain businesses. So a lot sort of remains on pause as the talks remain on pause now through July and August.
Yeah, it's been, one continual wait and see kind of an effort since January, I think. And we wish we had more clarity. I think at this point, though, our base case, and Lauren, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding and that what we've been guided to, which is only recently, and I will tell you that most of our economists have written reports that then they had to rewrite, days and sometimes hours later because the news cycle has changed so quickly. So my understanding is that our base assumption now is about an average rate of 15%. which would be the 10% rate on all of our partners, with some higher adjustments for special sectors, including automotive, semiconductors, possibly some healthcare, steel, aluminum have their own set. Let's talk a little bit more about our base case, and if 15%, does that feel like an accurate representation right now? Because of course, everyone's got to have some kind of input to make this assumption on what they're importing.
Yeah, and we still, just for that base case, we still use that Yale Budget Lab. They have a good estimate, and they clearly calculate it just based on the news flow. And yes, to your point, an average effective tariff rate, it's been updated, I think, like even this morning. And that's around like 16%. So again, we're in wait and see mode. Xi, Trump, they're obviously in discussions now. We think that's really the biggie in terms of the relationship and the trade talk that needs to be discussed. I think it's a little bit encouraging. I haven't seen like a major headline of how things are going south with these trade talks. The UK trade deal, though, was sort of cut quickly, right? And we're not really stacking up trade deals all that quickly with other partners. Again, I think it's smoothing over the deal with China. That's really the imperative for what the administration's ultimate goal was from the start. But it should, once we get past any sort of, even if it's like agreement in principle, that would be significant in terms of us being sort of past peak uncertainty. So I think from there, though, you assume, yes, there is a tax on the consumer, tariffs are a drag on growth, and that inflation could bump up. And just to put some numbers to it specifically to the inflation, I think we're thinking more of like an inflation rate between like 3 and 4%, just the current configuration of what's being floated right now for tariffs. And then it will take us basically next year to sort of round trip back to where we are in inflation today. So that's pretty significant in terms of that's clearly more than just like a one-time price increase. And then to your point too, impacts will also be sector specific. And we have sector analysts with the bank that expect some reshoring of production. It could be possible, but it's probably mostly limited. Yes, there's that whole nearshoring, friendshoring that you brought up, Barbara, but other mitigation strategies just seem to be more popular than just picking up manufacturing and moving it, right?
Yeah, we've heard from just a variety of clients here in Los Angeles. I was in a meeting last week where the client worked in cosmetics, and one of their major products is press-on nails, and that's all imported. And so I think they were debating whether or not it becomes a price increase for that product. And it's a low-cost product, so there's possible, it's possible that the price increase won't be noticed by the customer because it is kind of a low-cost product. But yet another client that we work with, also in beauty services, has products that they manufacture here, and the ingredients, like skin creams and that sort of thing, the ingredients are imported. So their view was that they did not want to raise prices, and they're just going to eat it, and that's going to maybe cause them to raise prices on their services. So, it's like each business has got to do this individually. So in like the case of the second client, they'll keep the price the same on the creams and the beauty types of products that they sell, but the services may go up to balance that out. So, and then our first example with the press-on nails, which I know is very popular, that, it depends on consumer demand, and demand's strong, so that can maybe withstand a price increase. Just two local examples. Looking at first quarter earnings, which we just finished. So we finished first quarter earnings, kind of wrapping it up last week, actually. Did we learn anything about tariffs? I know a lot of companies curtailed their guidance for the rest of the year. So S&P companies, by and large, I think came through with earnings, but they had a lot of uncertainty about the second part of 2025. So Lauren, maybe speak to that a little bit, if you could.
Yeah, so general trends on that. And again, this is backward looking Q1 right? Pulled guidance to your point, and then just that uncertainty has sort of been at the expense of investment or even hiring, right? Until there's greater clarity. And just on the retailers, they reported some mixed results, I'll say, and then some commentary you saw out of like Walmart saying that they can't eat the tariff impact and may need to pass on some sort of impact to their consumers. And obviously that got the attention of someone in the White House. But there are some evidence of inventory pull forwards, but I think the real impact will probably manifest in the upcoming quarters. And I'd say whether it's like psyche or otherwise, there were definitely mentions of some consumer degradation. And I think that this is sort of important because the layering of this plus tariffs could be significant to business owners, right? And that benefited someone like a Dollar General that mentioned higher income consumers. That segment had actually been driving growth. That's a fairly interesting read across. And then on the other end of the spectrum, like Best Buy, categorically is going to be very heavily impacted by looming tariffs on electronics, specific to China. How they guide on a go-forward basis, right? That looks very challenging. So it's just a good example of like pulled guidance. I heard from a client a couple of weeks ago who owns a couple grocery stores in and around Colorado, and he was mentioning that there was actually signs of trade down in aisles, right? And I think that's partially the impact of cumulative inflation, sort of just like month to month, right? Biting at consumer spending. But again, I think that's sort of like a very telling indicator of some more like local consumer degradation that's highly important for us to watch. So it just sounds to me that this year is probably a story of things happening to margins that aren't great. And the big idea with these larger cap companies is that I don't think they'll all miss at once. I think it's more of like a window of adjustments. That's what tariffs will be, a window of adjustments, and not just like a flashpoint for their profitability or for their margins.
One of the things that's gotten a lot of attention are rare earth minerals. And I understand that's going to be front and center of the dialogue with China this week. So rare earth minerals and semiconductor chips, that's the other segment in the headlines. Walk us through that a little bit. What are we expecting there, and what have we heard at this point?
Yeah, I say so. One thing that we've really, I think the headlines at least, have probably underestimated is how important what you just said, those pieces are, and the sort of leverage that China has. It's extraordinarily important to point out, just on the rare earth piece as the example, China is actually the refinery to the world, right? So yeah, we have rare earths. They're actually not inherently that rare, right? We have a bunch of rare earths in the US, but digging them up, refining them, I mean, China is all over that supply chain. They sort of have a chokehold on that refining process specifically. So I do think that will be a point of leverage in these talks. I don't know how far some of these retaliatory tariffs will be in those sort of sectors, but I do think those are great points, and it's sort of like an underlying thing that China could just sort of bring up in these talks that could make them more contentious, right? And we know the other important aspect, and I looked at this in recent import data, there's been a flood of goods from China to, as an example, Southeast Asia, right? Vietnam as the real bump up in imports to the US. And there's that backdooring issue. So that's another point that I think it's sort of like a finer point to these US-China trade talks that will be significant. But yeah, I understand why we're on day 2, right? A lot of complicated factors here.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I think, here in Los Angeles, I have had clients that have had negative impacts or cited negative impacts from decline in tourism, from international tourism, and even from Canada. And that's interesting because it's impacted the real estate market in certain areas, according to my clients out in Palm Springs and the desert areas. A lot of the sunbirds from Canada aren't traveling as much. So we are starting to see, whether or not it's kind of a decisive choice. Consumers all have choices just to avoid certain products or areas, or the trade down impact. But I don't think that's something that we're forecasting as a bank to be broad-based across the US. But I don't know, do we have a view on that? Do we think that consumer habits will change dramatically in any fashion? Are there any big trends among consumers now that we're picking up?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's backlash in the investment community. I read a few months ago in the paper, there's this new acronym that's been floated out there, ABUSA, which is anything but the USA, ABUSA. And I think that extends beyond portfolios, right? And some of the positioning that we're seeing, there's clear backlash. You're right about tourism. I was actually in Canada at the beginning part of April, coincidentally, and just like the vibes weren't good, right? There was reduced visits and trips empirically coming from Canada over the border, that's for sure. And then my boss who travels to Europe a couple times a year, Sweden, Denmark, there's some backlash too. Putting black dots on made in America products, right, to forewarn anyone who's shopping that they'd be purchasing a US product. So, I mean, that sort of global backlash, it's important to sort of watch. I think that there's a little bit of a fee of what we've been up to in terms of some of these protectionist measures. And I think it's coming in the form of those things, right? And we can't dismiss also there's already retaliatory tariffs out there, the agricultural product issue from China, just as an example, right? And I think that's sort of could be the result of loss in business. So I think there's probably more on the way, globally speaking.
So on the plus side, obviously we've had a lot of negative reaction. The markets reacted very negatively in April. We've recouped almost all of that sell-off at this point as the negotiations got underway and the administration put these 90-day pauses in. So for those that haven't been following, we had an extreme sell-off in early April when the reciprocal tariffs were announced and the initial rates. And it was almost a 20% drop in the S&P from peak to trough, when peak was early February. Now we've worked our way out of that as the pauses went into effect, and we've begun negotiations with some of our trading partners. One thing that's not talked enough about, or it's just beginning to be noticed, is actually the tariff revenue is helping us bring down our deficit. So the deficit is not grown as much as one would expect. And this will take us kind of into our sort of closing. You know, we think we'll probably close on this topic and then bring in everyone for Q&A if there are any questions. But I got a report today pointing out that the deficit's been reduced, you know, a couple $100 million basically by the tariffs that we've received so far. I'm just looking at it. It's from one of our third-party strategists. Yeah, actually, we've collected about $129 billion of tariffs recently, you know, in the first part of the year, and it's helped reduce the deficit. The deficit is something that the bond markets are paying attention to, and something that's come up in some of the tariff conversations with clients is, gee, you know, if our foreign holders if our trading partners who also are large holders of treasuries decide they don't want to own as many treasuries anymore, that could be a real problem for our bond market. So that is something we're keeping an eye on. I think my understanding at this point is that our two largest treasury holders, China and Japan, their holdings actually peaked several years ago, and they don't hold as much debt as they did. That said, obviously, we've got two big treasury auctions later this week. So let's think about the deficit in terms of tariffs. Lauren, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right in terms of that foreign ownership. And so it's important, the layering of all these things, right? So China's backed away from our treasury market. That started in 2013. Japan still owns more than $1 trillion in our treasury. So foreign ownership has mattered. And actually this year, it's been a little bit surprising to see sort of that play out in the bond market, to your point, Barbara. And there have been flare-ups in terms of those deficit concerns, but it's more of like a global phenomenon, right? And I think it just sort of adds to what I consider this year to sort of be like a risk management exercise. It feels like that's how we're thinking about managing portfolios, and that's how business owners are thinking about sort of like going into this year and some of the contingency planning that they've been having to do. But deficit, how this like interacts with the tariffs, I mean, that's really the bread and butter of the issue. So we'll have to see sort of how all that stacks up into the summer against the big, beautiful bill too, which is now with the Senate, and how that also plays into that deficit concerns.
Mm. Yeah, the tariffs are a very important part of how the tax bill will get composed. And you know, the tax bill is reliant on the tariffs to some degree. So not to a small degree either. So we're paying a lot of attention to that bill as it's taking shape in the Senate right now. So maybe at this point, we'll take some Q&A. Lauren will be dropping at 10:45. So I think, you know, let's see if there are any questions. I can, you know, we've got some other topics to discuss if not, but if there are questions, maybe someone from the Valley Economic Alliance can queue and order them for us. Okay, Dennis Washburn. I see a hand raised by Dennis. Thanks, Dennis.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I wanted to make sure it was unmuted. One of the things that strikes me about this entire conversation is that we're always paying attention to what the national or international picture looks like and what the administration is dealing with. But, you know, in Los Angeles County, you know, we've taxed and bonded ourselves and funded billions of dollars in transportation and education and water quality management and literally water quality. And if you look at all the bonded indebtedness and all the funding that we've given to ourselves here in LA County, the Valley or the Valley Economic Alliance is a substantial beneficiary of that. And in a way, we're kind of shielded or sheltered from some of the immediate impacts that we see and that, Lauren, that you've been telling us about and how we can deal with it. But all we can control here is what the folks at VEA can do, or at the chambers of commerce, or at our, you know, organizational levels of the school boards and the, you know, the bond oversight committees and so forth. My question is this: what do you see as the way forward for us in light of these national and international impacts, not just of the tariffs, but the tariff and protectionist mentality, when we're pretty wide open here in the San Fernando Valley, and we're working really hard to not just protect ourselves, but to express ourselves and to build a better lifestyle?
So I'll take that one, being the local. One of the things that's kind of tangential to the tariff conversation that did come up was filming and Hollywood. And, you know, it came up for a minute where, you know, like 100, I think it was, you know, not something that was really contemplated too deeply. But one of the things about LA, and maybe not the Valley specifically, but it does bleed into Burbank, you know, is film production. And we've lost film production for decades. And that's not just international, but it's, you know, to other cities like Atlanta. And so I think I'm hopeful that we'll start to see more protection, I guess a little bit more tax breaks or something to keep the film industry going. That's something that is sort of, you know, part of LA's DNA. And so for the job creators in film and media, there's been some good developments, I think, along that front, but it's challenging because there are other places that have the ability to, you know, do whole productions for less money. So, you know, and I think some of the topics you bring up, Dennis, would be, we're having one of our muni bond strategists come in tomorrow, actually. So I think a lot of the questions you bring up about the bondholders and how the Valley has undertaken certain certain sort of property measures and lifestyle measures through the bondholders, they're going to cover some of that. We got a lot of questions on DWP bonds after the fires. So maybe I'm not answering your question directly, but I think each region has got some exposure. And a lot of our manufacturing small businesses are in the Valley, in the North Valley, and they will be impacted. They've stated that, retail or otherwise.
Let me just chime a thought back in. Are you able to hear me?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, well, MTA is building a light rail line on Van Nuys Boulevard, like we have going north on Canoga, from the Orange Line. And it's $1.6 billion worth of employment and purchases of material and whatever. And the Valley should be getting a very significant I guess, bump in the economy from all the jobs, all the materials, all the transport and logistics, money and so forth. So there are many ways that the Valley Economic Alliance and LA, are able to capitalize on the money that we've already put aside for education, for transportation, water management, sanitation, all these things. It's literally tens of billions of dollars that are in operation right now. That's making our economy work. So I don't know whether tariffs are going to have a significant impact on the investment that we've made in ourselves so far. And I think we should be looking at how we can influence the implementation of all of that funding that we've put into ourselves here in LA County.
Well, I think I'm excited about the MTA progress. So I'm right outside a big building right here that will be an MTA stop in Century City. So thank you. I'm going to move on to Janine Shaw. I think I'm pronouncing that right. She's got her hand raised too. But thank you, Dennis. I think the MTA spending is interesting because it is really a lot of money, and I hope it'll bring jobs. So Janine.
First of all, thank you for pronouncing my name wrong. Right. Nobody ever pronounces it right. So kudos to you for that. I actually have two questions. My first question is, we're hearing, obviously, California now is the fourth largest economy in the world. And I'm just wondering, how does that isolate us from some of the federal policy that's taking place? And my second question is, I am born and raised in the Valley, but I live now in the city. And I'm just wondering, how do those two economies kind of interact and relate? Are they really that separate from each other, or do they function as one because people maybe work in the city, live in the Valley, or vice versa? And I'm just curious, what the dynamic is between those two economies.
So great question. Again, another one headed straight at me. So Lauren's getting a lot of education here. I think I go back long enough to remember when the Valley attempted to secede from the city. Some of you on the call probably remember that, but the Valley is this huge tax base, and it's a very wealthy, it's not, the whole Valley isn't wealthy, but just as a tax base, it's hugely powerful. And the attempt to secede from the city was voted down by everyone in the city because the city couldn't manage, to pay for things without the Valley's tax base. So I have clients in the Valley. They are happy with their council people. I live in the city now. I live over by the Hollywood Bowl. I wish I could say I felt as good about my representation. I see a lot of issues in the city where things are not getting repaired. Streetlight problems, road work, basic stuff, trees haven't been trimmed. So I think that really they're inseparable because the way the city council is composed, and again, this is sort of more, I'm speaking more as somebody that grew up in the Valley. My parents still live in the house I grew up in. I go out there pretty regularly. But I live in the city now, and I can tell you the Valley is a lot newer than the city, so their street looks fine. Their power lines are all grounded. Mine are hanging out in the back of my house. So I think, unfortunately, the city is going to be very reliant on the Valley, and I think to the extent that they can, I think the Valley should leverage it. the Valley's got a very powerful tax base, and probably, again, not every part of the Valley, but, it's a pretty significant, just a difference in how things are laid out, tax base per population. So and I think your first question was about California, as the fourth or fifth largest economy, depending on what you count. Yeah, it feels like a different world sometimes when I travel to other states. It does feel very different. And I think it's also very region specific. And that's something that we've had different microeconomies. And I think that's something Lauren's group has looked at a lot. Certainly with some of the real estate corrections, we've had corrections in, microeconomies, like smaller parts of the economy in California or New York. Like New York is also very different. But ultimately, it's how the tax revenue comes in, and how much does it cost for us to issue our bonds? I mean, at the end of the day, we are a bond issuer. Let's see, Abubakar. Abubakar's got a question, or a hand raised anyway. And forgive me if I'm not pronouncing that right.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Well, this question is for both of you, Barbara and Lauren. I am with New York Life, and we are in the other side of the market. And a lot of our work right now is about asset repositioning. I wonder what is your thought right now about asset repositioning? Besides that, it is a good time to buy, it's a good time probably to hold, et cetera, et cetera. And the other side of the situation is actually how the bond market is currently reacting. And we know the Fed is not going to raise tax anytime soon, but there is a lot of movement in the bond market. So maybe you can give us a little view in your side of the market. Besides, asset repositioning is actually very, very important investment strategy that's being used right now. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Sure. So asset disposition, I think, is what you were talking about.
Asset repositioning.
Repossession. Not something I'm familiar with, but one thing I'll say is the consumer's been pretty resilient. So if we're talking about asset repositioning, the consumer's been more resilient than expected. Kind of at the lower end, it's been tough. The lower end consumers had a tough time, but the upper end consumer has fared pretty well. They're just not spending on goods as much. It's more experiences. So travel, film, concerts, race car experiences. So there's a big difference in spending between the lower income cohort and the upper income cohort. So it really depends on the asset. And we've seen that in real estate too. We've seen a big difference. Certain parts of the real estate market are fine. Other parts of the real estate market are very challenged, like office. And even within office, some parts of the office market, suburban office is fine. I mean, with some exceptions, but suburban offices have been much more robust than offices based in city centers, which have seen much higher vacancy. So the real estate market also has been highly variable. Really depends on the asset. Let's see, I've got one more hand up here, Mark Scroggs.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for this. I'm a talent agent, so I work in entertainment. So with regards with the incentives and all that, last evening, I was thinking about this. I was at an event for the TV Academy for The Last of Us. At the screening, they were talking about different things with the production, how they built Jackson Hole, Wyoming, how they had like about 1,000 costumes. So in addition to like the tax incentives, I know that lumber, fabric, all that stuff is tariffed. A client of mine, his wife works in costumes in New York. They are losing stuff because those little extra things like that add to it. It raises the prices even higher. So just wanted to put that out there because it's one of those things that no one kind of thinks about. You think about, you don't think about. And my other question is, as just a consumer, what is being tariffed now? I was getting some car work done and I asked if they've been affected and they said, oh, we haven't except for brakes, and they started listing a bunch of things. Is there like a guideline anywhere besides like bananas and coffee and things?
Yeah. Lauren, do you have a good source for that?
A public source, again, that Yale Budget Lab, they have some Excels that actually break out what's getting tariffed. But it's complete, but obviously it's not inclusive
sure.
of, right, all the things you're talking about on there, what will eventually be tariffed. Yeah, I understand it's tough to think about all the components and what's getting tariffed here. Even, there was actually a good article in the Wall Street Journal yesterday about the doll, and this is sort of like the offhanded comment that Trump had made about doll manufacturing, and maybe, we just need less dolls, or I forget what the comment was. There's 3 dolls rather than however many. But it's interesting, like even depending on where sourcing from, right, that makes all the difference in the world in terms of some of the tariff rates and even what would make sense in terms of moving certain production to other locales. So it's sort of a big web at this point. But to your point, yeah, there are a lot of impacts, and it all depends on really where those source materials are coming from.
Thanks.
Yeah, Mark, there was a Wall Street Journal article probably 2 months ago that I think it was on the CPB, the Custom and Border Patrols, and it was on the agents that sort of were the brokers for some of these customs, the brokers for inventory coming in. And there is a public listing, and I think it mentioned it in the journal, of something like 80,000 products that were sort of susceptible to tariffs. And I'm just filtering through my notes because one of our third-party strategists, yeah, I don't have it here, but there are some public sources. So I'd say that Yale Budget Labs that Lauren mentioned, and there was a journal article on customs brokers, and I think they mentioned a public source too. But yeah, I know it's something like 80,000 products. So it's going to really vary a lot, and there has been some substitution. But to your point,
if I'm allowed to do that, we have market research at New York Life that give us those information. And if Mark can email me, I'll be happy to help or assist.
Great, thank you.
Barbara, I'm going to hop off, but just wanted to say thank you to you all. It's nice to be with you, and reach out with any further questions.
Thanks so much, Lauren. We really appreciate you spending the time here. And I think we can flip it back to Greg, unless we've got any other questions. I'm happy to take any other questions. Maybe I'll wrap with just the things that we're watching, like sort of the things that we're watching. I'll wrap quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Greg. But we obviously are watching tariffs. We're watching the deficit and inflation, and we're watching the economy and employment. So we're paying attention to all these data releases. And with that, the story is going to continue. So I'm going to kick it back to Greg here. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here with us today. We appreciate your participation. We appreciate this discussion. Thank you to Barbara and your colleague for being here. This partnership with Bank of America has been strong for quite some time and will remain strong. This video will be uploaded into our archives, and if you want to refer back to it, there was a lot of critical and important information that was shared today, and I believe that it would be useful. If you'd like to also let your colleagues know or friends know, they can refer back to it. On this call as well is our Director of Operations, Sharon Harris. You can also reach out to the Valley Economic Alliance anytime if you'd like more information, or if you'd like to get anyone's contact information in order to facilitate more of this conversation in the future. Again, thank you, Barbara, and to your colleague from New York for being here. This has been a tremendous morning, and I think that a significant amount of information was downloaded by everyone on the call. And if you also need the information to the Valley Economic Alliance, we'll be sure to put it in the chat for you. I'm sure you all have it, but please feel free to stay in touch. We continue to be in all parts of the 400 square miles of the San Fernando Valley, and you can reach out to us anytime that you need any help, or if you have anyone that needs our support. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.